So I got about 10 minutes and a dozen slides, and I'm just going to skip through them, and if you have questions, I think probably at the end you could come to address them. So we are the U.S. government, the federal government. A lot of folks I find to get confused sometimes because Fish and Wildlife is pretty common in a lot of our organizations and agencies. And we're within the Department of the Interior. We're a bureau, actually, within the Department of Interior. Some of the other bureaus are like Park Service, BLM, Bureau of Land Management. Don't see those folks in the East Coast too much. USGS, and there are a number of bureaus within the department. But we are the only one that's tasked with a very specific mission, and that is really the conservation protection of fish, wildlife, plants, and their habitats. And so this is a very important thing for us here because it really does, it takes a lot of complexity out of multi-use types of missions and reduces it down to give us a focus and a function. There are a lot of branches within the government, and I'm not going to go down the whole road that leads to Ninigret and Rhode Island complex. But you know, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service isn't just a National Wildlife Refuge System. You know, there are a lot of other branches like the Division of Law Enforcement, which is responsible for enforcing migratory bird laws and you know, federal laws, and you know, we have operational branches as well. So you know, budget administration, information technology, ecological services. This is responsible for administering the Endangered Species Act, and all of these things combined are really important parts of working towards that, you know, conservation of fish, wildlife, and plants mission. We are the National Wildlife Refuge System, so we're over here, and then within the system there's a whole bunch of different divisions, which I'm not going to break down individually. But the National Wildlife Refuge System is a network of lands. So these are the public lands that our agency is responsible for managing for, you know, the conservation, management, restoration, fish, wildlife, and plants, and their habitats. And so again, there's, you know, these mission statements as they kind of transcend, you know, there's really important language here. You know, it's a conservation organization. So, you know, preservation is a part of conservation, but we are active managers where we need to be. And so we do practice, you know, management to provide these habitats and restore, rehabilitate where it's appropriate. And so that's what the National Wildlife Refuge System is. It's the land that we manage. We have a long history. 112 years ago, the first refuge was established in Florida, and there's my buddy Jeff Moran. Before he cut his mustache. No, 112 years ago, Pelican Island down in Florida was established under the President Teddy Roosevelt, and really it was established because of market harvesting. People were just slaughtering migratory birds, mostly for their plumage, so they could sell in the market for you know, fashion wear, hats, and clothing. And so there was this recognition that, hey, we need to protect these species before they're extirpated or extinct. And so Pelican Island was created, and this gentleman in the picture, Paul Kroger, he was appointed as the refuge manager, which is a very bold position to be in, but at the time he was tasked with going out and telling people that they couldn't continue to kill all these birds that they were making money with, making money on. And so that was the beginning for us, and from there it grew. It grew primarily up these flyways, and we got, hold on, I got a laser here, let me see.
It works.
I know, but I usually went the wrong way and laser my eye. We got the Atlantic Flyway, so here's Pelican Island down here. We got the Atlantic Flyway, and so, you know, the refuge system began to expand and grow, and Mississippi Flyway, Central Flyway, Pacific Flyway. But in the beginning, it really was about finding, you know, these areas, these concentrated important areas where wildlife need to migrate. And so there were more sanctuaries in the beginning. You know, they were actively managing, creating impoundments, creating habitat, but they were really people out, hands off, No hunting, that kind of stuff, and really just places where wildlife could just make their migration. But that has evolved over time. As science developed, and our agency has grown beyond that and kind of recognizes the importance of, or thinking about things in an ecosystem perspective, and thinking about uplands, and thinking about migratory songbirds. So it's not just the pelicans, it's not just the shorebirds, and so that refuge system has grown substantially. Currently, we're at 567 refuges, 95 million acres. That's quite a you can see most is in Alaska. Largest here, Arctic, 19.2 million acres. So that's just ridiculous. That's like Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Vermont. Probably even more than that. Not quite Maine. We have some smaller refuges. Mill Lock on Minnesota is the smallest at half an acre. But a lot of those refuges in the lower 48 are less than 1 million acres. But there are some big ones. Charles M. Russell in Montana, it's 500,000 acres. And so that's our primary responsibility. We also are responsible for a lot of submerged land and waters. So 740 million acres. Most of that is our marine national monuments. Those are like 40 million acres, and that's in partnership with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. And so it's not just these 95 million acres in lands. There's also a substantial amount that's in water management districts, the Perry Pothole region up in here. Hello, come on in. I'm going to catch up with my notes, thank you. Wetland management districts, that's the official name of them. So those wetland management districts, it's like 150 million acres of submerged land, wetlands. And so, it's pretty substantial system of lands, network of lands. We're divided into 8 regions. Some people refer to the headquarters as Region 9. I don't know if that's an official title, I've never seen it, but it used to be? Okay. You can see, probably Alaska's its own region, and approximately half the country's in the east, region 3, 4, and 5. And we're Region 5, so we're the Northeast region. And in the Northeast region, it's 13 northeastern states, so Virginia up to Maine, and you can see, these are all the refuges out that are in this area. 76 refuges currently, which is, we have about 500,000 acres total in refuge lands in Region 5. I'm a forester, so a substantial amount of that is forest, which is I found to be intriguing in a recent analysis, that about 300,000 acres of these refuge lands are forests. And you can see some of them are standalone, like Great Dismal down here. That's our largest refuge in the region. It's 110,000 acres. This is where I'm stationed up here, Lake Umbagog. That's a 37,000 acre refuge. And there's some other pretty sizable refuges, Blackwater. Where's Blackwater? I can't pick it out from here. Down here somewhere.
You ought to be able to burn up there any day now, right?
Today, probably, right?
Yeah, right.
Your phone's ringing.
How many feet of snow do you still have?
Oh, burn up north?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I won't even burn in the summer. We have a lot of snow up there. But what I want to point out is some of these refuges are standalone refuges. But a lot of them, like with Rhode Island, where's Rhode Island? Right here, you can see these circles around it. A lot of these refuges have been kind of consolidated into what's called a complex. So that's why it's Rhode Island National Wildlife Refuge Complex, and it's made up of a number of different refuges, like Ninigret. 5 refuges, thanks, Dave. And you can see there's a lot of these that happen, and basically it's just kind of like this aggregation of refuges, mostly administratively, and you basically because we're short on people, so we figure if we just create complexes, then we can administer a number of these different refuges with a smaller staff. But some of the refuges are very progressive, and I don't have it outlined, but Silvio Conti Refuge is a really interesting refuge. It's kind of a modern refuge. And so basically that starts with an ecoregion, which is the Connecticut River watershed, 7.2 million acres. And so it's recognized as being a very significant ecosystem, ecoregion. And so it was established as a refuge, a Silvio Conti National Fish and Wildlife Refuge. And then anything purchased within those boundaries becomes a division. So basically, it's the inverse. Instead of starting with a refuge and saying, oh, we're going to put all these into a complex, it's basically saying, we're going to call this whole thing the complex or the refuge, and then everything becomes a division. And so that's kind of the model. So I'll talk a little bit in a few minutes. But we have the Silvio Conti Refuge. We also have one of our newer refuges, the Great Thicket Refuge, which I don't think is on here, but it's out of this, it's in this general area. It operates out of Great Bay. But again, it's thinking about things at a larger spatial scale and thinking, we can't do this alone. So what's this arrangement of lands and partners? And, oh, what are we at?
Sorry.
All right, cool. So I'm super excited about the Refuge System. Who are we? We're land stewards. So we are responsible for managing these lands and being responsible and wise land stewards. Wildlife first, that's something that's come up. It's not just in our mission statement, but there's been legislation that passed that says, hey, we are a wildlife first organization. So everything else that we can do, great, but we want to make sure that it's compatible with our purpose, our mission, and then our purposes in our refuges. We're here to protect endangered species and provide access to the public. So, we have something that's called the Big Six. I'm going to try and list them. It's hunting, fishing, interpretation, photography, observation, and recreation. And so whenever those are compatible with our mission, compatible with our management, and then they're allowed. And there's a whole process to determine compatibility. And if they're not compatible, then again, wildlife first. We are a scientific organization, so we use science to make informed decisions, and we also contribute to the scientific community through studying the work that we do on refuges, and we're conservation partners. We recognize that we can't do this alone. 500,000 acres in the Northeast is just little island habitats, and so we can't really work towards broad scale, large regional conservation goals, population goals, these little lands. And partnering, being good conservation partners, working with states, working with non-government organizations is a critical part of being successful in our mission. And then last slide, I'll just end with referencing these two documents, because there's a lot that we didn't cover in 10 minutes about the fish and wildlife, who we are and what we do. I think that's kind of a general overview. But I did want to mention that, overall, we're responsible for conserving and protecting migratory bird species, threatened endangered species, interjurisdictional fish, like Atlantic salmon, good example, certain marine mammals, manatee comes to mind, and species of international concern. And that's what we call a trust species. So if you hang around with fish and wildlife folks, you'll probably hear the word trust species. That's what trust species is. Migratory birds, threatened endangered plants and species and animals, interjurisdictional fish, certain marine mammals, and species of international concern. But we also recognize that to provide good habitat and to manage for those, we really need to think about an ecosystem, ecological function. And we really need to be managing where we can within an ecological context, and that healthy ecosystem is a resilient ecosystem and sustains suitable habitat, appropriate habitat over time. And so where appropriate, that's, I believe, probably our overarching philosophy is really approach this. And it's something that's not traditional. It's been evolving over time as science evolves with conservation biology, landscape ecology. But these are very informative documents. The Fulfilling the Promise, they're visionary documents. So this is basically what we think the Fish and Wildlife Service should be. If you ever have time, whether you're in Fish and Wildlife or not, if you haven't checked it out, Conserving the Future really does tell, and our leaders really look to these as a source of information, as guidance as to how we get to this, conservation success. And so, and it really does outlined a vision, it outlines a strategy. It tells us, you know, the future is really these model refuges are eco-regional. We need to think about things in landscapes, not just individual refuges, but how we fit in, what's our role, and that we need to be relevant to our publics, and we need to reach out to them and garner their support. And so, you know, we can, either voice can be heard and help us achieve our conservation mission. And yeah, that's pretty much, I guess that's it.
Thanks,
Is that
Bill.
10 minutes?
No.
Was it more?
A little bit more than 10, but
All right.
yeah. Obviously, 10 minutes doesn't do justice to giving an overview of the National Wildlife Refuge System. And Jeff is going to pick up with one of the threads that you mentioned, which is the forest inventory. So
Okay.
we'll let Jeff come up and get started. And
Yep.
this afternoon, we'll be able to take a deep dive into a lot more about the refuge system, and a lot more, as you'll hear this morning.
Thank you.
Is that you?
No.
There you go. Nice job.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks. No problem.
Hold on, Tom.
All right, hi everyone. Again, I'm Jeff Moran, I'm a forest ecologist, the Fish and Wildlife Service. So it's nice to be here. It's nice to see all the different folks in the room. When I had a chance to be at one of these kind of field tours when we were up in Massachusetts, up at Montague Plains, and a lot of folks in this room were up there. I thought that was a great field tour because the conversations, you know, they really overlapped, and hearing people introduce who they were and what their jobs were in here really created is a nice